Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelli Poole. I'm the Director of Racial Equity and Homelessness at Social Venture Partners Los Angeles. I'm so excited to be here at today's Home Together event to celebrate the good work of LA Family Housing. They've been working in the community for over 30 years to end homelessness, and we would not be where we are today without them. So super excited to be here today with two of our brilliant elected officials that are working here in Los Angeles to make our communities a better place each day. Supervisor Holly Mitchell leads the 2nd Supervisorial District in Los Angeles County. Supervisor Mitchell, welcome.
Appreciate you, Kelli. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and our second guest, the equally brilliant Councilmember Nithya Raman. Nithya is a Los Angeles City Council member for the 4th District. Welcome, Nithya.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Great. Thanks to you both for joining us. We're going to jump right in. We're going to talk about collaboration. As you all know, it takes collaboration at so many levels to do the work of ending homelessness. And we know that the city and the county have been collaborating for years to address some of our most challenging problems here. So I'd be curious, can you all talk about how the city and the county have worked together with community-based organizations like LA Family Housing to end homelessness over the past year or few years? We'll start with Councilmember Raman.
Okay, well, this is an interesting question because even though LASA has existed since the early 90s, city-county collaboration has actually been a challenging thing to take on for this region. The county, a lot of people don't know that the county takes care of things like public health, health services, mental health, and that the city actually doesn't have those tools in its toolbox to take on issues like homelessness, which at its core are so related to those issues. And so I think this idea of city-county collaboration is an essential one, but it hasn't always been easy or straightforward. That being said, since I worked at the city the last time around, I worked there briefly in 2014, the amount of collaboration that has taken place in just these last few years and the change, the level to which there is communication between the city and county has, that the change in that collaboration has been enormous. I think there's more to do. There's all kinds of ways in which that coordination can be better improved, ways in which departments and council districts can talk to each other more effectively and work together to make sure services are being delivered effectively to those who need them the most. But I think that we can't at this moment not forget to acknowledge how far we have come in these last few years. And I also just wanted to say that I think what has been interesting about this time is also how much nonprofit partners and community partners and volunteers have stepped up and played a role in the expansion of our homeless services system over these last few years. We have, just in the last few years, invested so much more in services than we have before. That expansion could never have happened without partners like LA Family Housing, who are ready to step up, who are ready to expand their work, and who are ready to take on more as the need becomes greater in the community. So, I think this is a really interesting moment in LA because we have a lot to do. The challenges have never been bigger, but I think it's also a moment to look back and acknowledge just how far we've come.
Absolutely. And what about you?
The only thing I would add to that, I think, is recognizing the power of Measure H and HHH and the fact that voters also stepped up and said, I understand. The city can build, the county can provide the wraparound, the permanent supportive services to the housing, conversation. And so I think in that instance, both levels of government stayed true to their own lanes in terms of what we do and what we deliver. County delivers services. That's why I was most interested in running for the seat that I'm currently in, because that's just kind of my orientation. The other piece I would add is recognizing the role the city plays, quite frankly, in some of the real tough issues around zoning. I don't think it's fair for us to have a conversation about homelessness absent a conversation about the fact that LA as a region hasn't kept up with building. We know that all the various studies have maybe different numbers, but that, you know, as a county, we are short like 500,000 housing units. And so as we solve for and have conversation about our family, friends, and neighbors who are unhoused, one of the reasons we have to acknowledge this bottleneck in our housing system is lack of construction. And so this issue about what we build for whom and where, location, I think is a critical element. Lastly, I would just say the example that I saw, that I experienced, that let me know it could happen was a trip I took to Utah over 10 years ago now, about where I led a Senate delegation to Utah to look at and experience and ask questions about what they did to reduce their chronic homeless population by like 90% over a 10-year span of time. And it took me a minute when I got there to have the aha moment, but what I saw was every level of government over time, and over time is important for us as elected officials, because it can't just stop because I have a relationship with a council member, so we partner together well. It's got to span time, transitions, people in office, you know, which party's in power. It didn't matter in Utah because they made a commitment collectively to solve for homelessness. So at the state level, the county and city all locked arms, and you know, were singing from the same hymnal, if you will, about what they were going to do to solve it. And it struck me because I realized, sadly, that I don't know that I had ever experienced that, where every level of government really were on target with the same singular priority. And that's how they experienced that systemic change. And that's what we have to solve for, systemic change, not just coming up with policies at the county and city level to solve for providing housing for this particular family, but how are we going to solve for systemic change? Because that's the role of government.
Oh, so good. It's almost like you know what I'm going to ask next. Let's talk about systemic change, and specifically from the point of view of structural racism, systemic racism. We know in 2020, our most recent homelessness count showed that African-American folks make up some 34% of our homelessness population, while they only represent about 8% of the population here in Los Angeles. And so we know that this is a result of systemic racism, structural racism, discrimination in both access to housing and services. So we'll start with Supervisor Mitchell. How can we work collectively to address the impact of systemic racism and really push for systemic change around housing policy?
That's a pretty loaded question, Kelly, because you can't have a conversation about systemic racism in one area of our life and not acknowledge the fact that it permeates everything. Mm-hmm. You know, when I present to the world as an outward-facing, middle-aged Black woman, I experience systemic racism in every aspect of my life that you can imagine, from policing to the wealth gap for Black women that we know is expansive, to my ability to access healthcare services. The study that the California Wellness Center did years ago that talked about my life expectancy is directly correlated to my zip code, my ability to have housing, safe housing, affordable housing, and to maintain that, you know, over the course of my lifetime. And so when we talk about really breaking down systemic racism and acknowledging the role that, you know, white supremacist ideology plays in building and maintaining systemic racism, we've got to look across the board. And some days I wake up and feel overwhelmed by that. And other days I wake up and feel like I have no other charge but to run into the burning building. We look at the impact COVID has had on communities of color. No one should have been surprised about which communities were going to be disproportionately harmed by both this dual public health and economic pandemic. And so it's got to be a broader conversation around what government, what nonprofit organizations must do to really combat systemic racism. I was really proud to come into a progressive county board of supervisors that had the vision a year or two ago and created, I always get the name right, so I'm looking at my notes here, the Anti-Racism, Diversity, and Inclusion Initiative. ARDI, it's called for short, where the county, as an initiative, it's an initiative of the board, that the board is driving it in collaboration with the CEO, where we're confronting and acknowledging anti-racism. We are confronting anti-Blackness, quite frankly, in every aspect of the work of the Board of Supervisors. You know, there will be a motion that comes out of the board in the next couple of weeks that really puts some meat on the bones in our effort to talk about anti-Asian hate, and how we study it, how we collect the data, and what we do about it. And so these initiatives are really important for the county to look internally in terms of our own systems that we operate, the departments that people rely on for services, as well as externally in terms of how we are forward facing to clients, people who benefit, who rely on the county for services, and how we interact with the external world, nonprofit organizations and other levels of government. You know, but for a governmental entity, for an elected body to name it and create and fund and staff and guide the work of that kind of initiative, I think is really important. And I'm proud of that work.
Yeah, absolutely. Councilmember, what about you? How do we do this? How do we address systemic racism in housing or in general?
I just wanted to say, every time I've been on a couple of panels now with Supervisor Mitchell, and every time I'm on a panel with you, I learn something. So I'm very grateful to be sharing this space with you. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you.
This is I want to harken back to what you were saying in your previous answer, in terms of what the city controls, and this question about systemic racism in our housing policies. This comes back to those aspects of homelessness that are within the city's control to change. And I think it's incredibly important for us to be talking about them, to talk about the history of what happened in LA that led us to a situation today where Black Angelenos are significantly overrepresented in our unhoused population, and what we can do, what I can do as a council member of a district that is today majority white and relatively affluent relative to the rest of the city. What is my role, and what is the role of residents in this district? What do we need to be advocating for? What do we need to be thinking about? You know, when homelessness in Los Angeles actually used to be primarily a single older white men for
right.
many decades.
Right.
That changed in the 80s. And it changed because of two reasons. It changed because of deindustrialization and people losing their jobs and economic devastation. And it changed because of our housing policies. It changed because of racist housing policies like racial covenants that limited the neighborhoods where Black residents could live, and of an affordable housing crisis that then disproportionately impacted Black residents in Los Angeles. And so the moment that we're in today is a direct result of our housing policies here in Los Angeles. So I look at what we have control of as a city. I look at our policies around where denser housing can be built, where cheaper housing can be built, the rules that govern that. And I say that it's my job as a council member to advocate for undoing those policies and to start thinking about how we can accommodate more housing, and more specifically, more affordable housing in our neighborhoods, to make sure that we are undoing the legacy of this racism that has defined Los Angeles and that has shaped the crisis that we are in today. And I think that that's incredibly, to me, that is some of the most vital work that I can do as a council member. One of the things that I'm proud of in my election, though, is that I think for me, this election represented a change in LA's electorate in many ways. It was a huge increase in participation. So District 4 has always been a high participation district. The number of voters here increased from the last general election to this general election from 24,000 to 130,000. So huge increase in participation. And those voters who came out to vote voted for me, a pro-housing, pro-density candidate, someone who was willing to talk about the impact of these policies. And I think what we hear and what we see as we go out into the district is really people who are willing to grapple with these issues in a much more tangible, in a much more straightforward way than ever before. And I think that for me personally, I feel like this is one of the most important responsibilities that I have, is to take this opportunity and to push it as far as I can.
Oh, absolutely.
Can I add one more element? Because I'm listening to the council member. I completely agree with everything you said. And I think that there were some other unintended consequences of policies that happened in the decade of the 80s that also have had a direct impact on our number of unhoused. Before Prop 13.
Yes, that's right.
And the powerful statement that middle class in the valley, white homeowners said about where they wanted their money to go. Prop 13 was a sign. The war on drugs and the disproportionate impact that had on Black and brown and poor communities, the over incarceration of people who then were released to what? Who lost jobs, lost their families, came back to communities that they didn't even recognize. And the reversal of many of the public benefit programs, our CalWorks programs, are programs that were designed to keep families out of poverty during the 80s under the Reagan administration and others, really reversed themselves and plummeted more people into deeper poverty for prolonged periods of time. Where we paid them subsidies that in LA County, you could not sustain yourself. You can't afford the fair market value of a 2-bedroom apartment on a CalWorks grant. You just can't, literally. And so all of these policies, whether intended or not, I think created the perfect storm to lead to where we are today.
Yeah, that's right. And one thing I learned recently, which I found really surprising, is that today we pay less in monthly general relief than we did in the 70s and 80s. So that number decreased.
It did.
And it stayed low, and it stayed low. And by the way, the estimates of the number of people who are on general relief who are unhoused right now is like 60 or 70%.
Of course.
Right? I mean, it's astounding. So the legacy of that period of the simultaneous focus on policing and incarceration and the complete erasure of our social safety net, you can draw a direct line to what is happening.
Yes, you can. You absolutely can.
And I'm excited because we're talking about it, and I think we're taking steps to undo it, hopefully.
I agree.
I completely agree. And I feel like we're in good hands with the leadership of each of you, the willingness to talk about these things. You all just listed a number of propositions, policies, opportunities. We know that tons of folks that may be watching today or really are just interested in making change want to do things beyond donating, beyond volunteering, right? They want to get involved at the policy and systems level. And so how can individuals serve as an advocate in the work to end homelessness? What are some ways that they can take action? Supervisor Mitchell, we can start with you.
I really appreciate the question because it's really an important one. And the councilwoman, I'm sure, has had similar experiences as I have, particularly as a candidate on the campaign trail, when you are really immersed in neighbor to neighbor conversations, homeowners association groups, et cetera. And for me, it really is this question: what are we going to build, for whom, and where? And until every Angelino is open to and embraces the notion that I am willing for my block, my own personal block, to change, to look different, to accommodate the housing needs of all of my family, friends, and neighbors. So those are the kinds of conversations we have to have. I've got a team member who told me the story of how she defined homelessness to her very young child. And after she explained it to her, her very young child said, "Oh, you mean like us?" Because of a family and real life kind of happens to everybody's circumstance. They were at that moment living with her grandparents. And so she understood, we're living in grandma's house. This isn't our house. So we too are homeless. So until everybody can identify and understand the causes, the who, the why, and what we collectively are responsible to do about it, I think those are basic, deep, fundamental questions and answers that we have to arrive at for ourselves, because that dictates our actions. That dictates how we behave and the words and language we use when we go to public meetings and homeowners association meetings, and when we participate in public comment at your city council, your board of supervisors, when you encourage policies that are progressive to create opportunities for our unhoused, as opposed to oppose them. So I'm asking everybody to start with yourself and your family, friends, and neighbors in terms of how we check our attitudes about what we build, for whom, and where.
Beautiful, beautiful. What about you, council member? How can folks get involved either at the city level or just in general to become good advocates to end homelessness?
You know, I was thinking about this question, and I think one of the most important things to recognize about this moment in LA, because of Measure H and because of Prop HHH and because of a widespread focus on providing services and care and housing to residents who are experiencing homelessness, this moment is a unique one. It is a relatively new one especially in this history of the city of Los Angeles, which has, for almost its entire history, responded to homelessness with anti-vagrancy laws, policing, and with incarceration. That has been the focus of our approach, our policy approach. That has also been where we have spent the most money. When I worked at City Hall in 2014, I found that almost 90% of spending on homelessness was going towards incarceration. That is what we were spending on. That was not that long ago. That was in 2014, right? And now, because of the hundreds of millions of dollars from Measure H and from HHH, we are actually spending on those things that can address homelessness and that can end homelessness. And I see people around me who voted for these measures who are getting frustrated because the pace of change is not fast enough, because they're not seeing visible improvements immediately in their communities, that they're frustrated with how homelessness appears to be increasing year after year, even after we're spending all of this money. And what I want to tell people who are with us in this moment, who care about this issue as much as I know all of us in this space do, is to double down. We need to do more. We need to continue saying yes, because we just started. We just started the right way to end homelessness here in LA. And it was going to take us some time. We've talked in this conversation about decades of systemic racism and underinvestment that led us to this perilous moment. We are not going to fix it in 2 years, but we will fix it. And for the first time, we are putting real resources into the things that will fix it. So to anyone who wants to get involved in this issue, to anyone who wants to be an effective advocate for this issue, I think you have to be a vocal part of the community that says yes. The community that says yes to more spending on services, to building housing in your own neighborhood, and to getting involved actively to be that voice that says yes, to counter all of the skepticism, all of the voices that say no, all of the voices that say not in my backyard, not in my neighborhood. And I think that is the only way we will get through this moment with the real clarity that we need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That was wonderful. Well, you heard it. Double down, get out there, be vocal. To the supervisor's point, be serious and intentional about what we build, for whom we build it, and where we put it, and start with ourselves. We're so excited to have both of your expertise leading the way in our county and city, and we know that you're going to do great things. To our friends at LA Family Housing, congratulations. Good job on all the work you've done through our communities. We are so proud of you, and we look forward to celebrating more success. Thank you both for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.